There we go. Okay, so we're recording a deep dive on feature flags. We have two approaches to go about this meeting. One is to kind of go through the vision page and talk about competition. And the other one is to go through the UI that you provided and discuss it that way. What would you prefer?
I think vision and competitors is more appropriate.
Okay. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So basically,
can you send me that link real quick? Just to make sure I have it up here. I can see it, but typing is always a challenge.
Just 1 minute. I am not a Zoom pro, so bear with me. Okay. So this is our current category feature flags page. And I'd like to say that it's perfect, but it's far from it. But basically what we discuss here is our vision for feature flags. And it briefly explains that feature flags is a technique that we use in software development in order to do some kind of incremental deployment. So it allows you to basically do continuous deployment without actually completing the feature. So you have the flexibility of developing on your master branch, and then if you feel that it's not ready to go and be shipped out, you can basically toggle the feature off and then hide it, either from all the users or from a subset of the users. And this ties to our big vision of CI/CD in general, which is all about incremental rollouts or incremental delivery, which means that at any given time you can just deliver a little portion of the code and not, everything or nothing. So if you go to the vision page, you'll see all the issues that are currently labeled as feature flags. These are both issues in the planned for a specific release or in the backlog. We have the overall vision of CI/CD and how it ties in. Everything that related to UX research issues and our documentation that links to the current feature flag implementation. And then we have what's next and why. And this basically changes. This is a page that I update every release, and it talks about what we're going to release next. And you can see that after we release the two strategies, which is percent rollout and user ID, our next thing that we're focusing on is internally testing it, so dog fooding. Those are the issues. And our current issue is, let's see, ability to associate feature flags with contextual issue, which is exactly what we're working on 12.4, which is tying in a specific issue to a feature flag. This states the maturity plan. We were, before 12.3, where we released the two strategies, we were in minimal, and now we're in viable, which means that we can basically do something with the current implementation of feature flags, which has both the strategies that we mentioned, percent rollout and user ID. Keeping in mind all our previous discussions where we discussed that user ID is useful, but not at the moment the way that it's currently implemented, which is that you actually have to, for every flag, enter the IDs of everyone that you want this to be turned on or off for. It's not scalable at the moment, but it is usable for specific use cases for someone who has a small customer base, for example. So it does address a specific target audience, but not our main audience, and we will address that in different issues. Add ability to associate feature flags with contextual issue, which is what we're working on at the moment, is a really big feature and ties to the direction, because basically it lets you know on a specific issue, for example, if there is a feature flag for it or not, or if it's going to be released to a certain percent of users. And we have quite a few customers that are interested in this specific capability and are willing to leave other competitors such as Jira just because they have no way to tie issues planned with their CI/CD pipeline. Because they use, let's say, Jira for planning, and they use GitLab for CI/CD. And just this way of tying in the issues may be a differentiator for them to move to GitLab as a single tool in terms of also planning. So it's very important to see how everything ties together. Next, we have permissions for feature flags. This is a really, really big topic in terms of who can turn on or off a feature flag. And this generated a lot of discussion internally in GitLab, because internally in GitLab, the developers have access to turn this on in production. So this started the whole discussion about what we should do. And at the moment, we decided to leave it as is, which means the developers can still turn off or on the feature flag per the project permission that they got, if it's maintainer or developer. And going forward, we probably need to address protected environments as a whole, not only for feature flags, but just protected environments as an entire subject. And this will tie in somehow to the protected environment view. Next, we have cookie-based access, and actually anything that you can call stickiness. So basically, we could have different strategies for feature flags, and each strategy may turn a different behavior for a specific user. And we need to make sure that every time they open the application, they have the same experience. So that one is an important one. API and CDN caching for feature flags is also really important, because it may have an impact on performance on every time you open the application, how we poll which feature flags are enabled and what behavior the user will get. The more feature flags we have, the more polling is going to be done and effect it will have eventually. And more explicit logging for accesses is basically auditing. We do need auditing capabilities for everything. So also for feature flags. Let me just see that that I'm being honest to what it says here. Yeah, so this is both auditing and also the visualization of what to expect for a specific target in terms of feature flags. And basically that's what we mentioned at the moment as part of the maturity plan. But I definitely think that I need to work on this page to extend the vision. And I'll talk in a minute about what I see in the future. I'll take a break before we go into competitive landscape and let you ask any questions if you want.
No, I think that's pretty clear. Maybe the only question I have would be like priority of those. I'm going to make an assumption that they're listed somewhat in the priority, that we probably want to attack those. Or does it not really matter? We're eventually going to attack them all anyway.
So in terms of priority, as I mentioned, our #1 priority at the moment is dogfooding. Dogfooding is not labeled as a direction item in our issues in GitLab, so that's why it's not appearing in this list, because basically in the vision page, we only have direction items. But in my personal opinion, and the person setting priority, We need to figure out how we're using this internally before we expose it to mass production. I mean, current users can use it potentially for specific use cases at the moment, but when I look at the market and how I want people to use feature flags, we need to be ready for it. We need to be ready in terms of big companies that are going to use it for many developers across the globe and on multiple projects. And until we know how we're going to use this internally, I don't think there's any point in continuing developing other features, because we got a lot of pushbacks regarding the current implementation. And until we know how to address them internally, I don't think that we need to work on any external feature, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. And when you say pushback, I think maybe it's important to, like, what are the current pain point pushback items that we need to address so we can.
So there are currently 2 pending items. I don't remember them by heart, but I can send them later. But I remember their topic. One of them is exposing the API to public API, because people want to be using this as scripting or through chat apps mechanism, and not necessarily through the UI, which slows them down. So that's one pushback that we got, and that's supposed to be solved in 12.4. And another pushback that we got is actually connecting our code base to our feature flags, because at the moment it's not connected. So those are the 2 big milestones that we need to overcome. They're both scheduled for this current release 12.4. And then people could potentially start working with it. We have gotten small feedbacks, like the UI was a little bit confusing, and that's something that we handled together, you and I both, regarding toggles that didn't appear in an environment view, or in the dashboard view, rather. So that's something small. But other teams, such as growth, don't actually have, at the moment, an answer to their problem. They want to use feature flags for A/B testing. So basically, they just want the application to work differently for different targeted groups. For example, they are working right now in people who joined GitLab and have been using it for under 30 days. They targeted that as a group, and they want to monitor or give features to that specific subset. Now, at the moment, we don't even have an entity that's called groups, and we do have an issue on that, and that you're pinged on it, and you know about this issue.
Yep.
So that's one thing that they don't have capability, but also we currently have only the option to turn something on or off for a % usage, but not like multiple behaviors for multiple %. So for example, I have early, like beginner users, which is people who started using for 30 days, that group. And then I have a group for someone who's been using it for 6 months, and then for a month. So potentially that's 3 different groups, and I'd like to give 3 different behaviors of the same feature. Just to make it sound really, really simple, let's say I decide to have someone get a blue interface, a green interface, a yellow interface, and then I want to check feedback on who has been using, like to decide which color is the best based on the feedback that I got from each set of the group. Really simple example, not something that someone would actually use, but following the same lines. So those are currently not supported and are currently not in the plan, definitely not for this year. So this year is all focused for dog fooding and the feedback that we get there. And I think 2020 will be a big year for feature flags, where we can actually address all the pains that we have, such as groups, copy paste or importing CSV that we've discussed before for user IDs, additional strategies. So now we have % rollout and we have user ID, but additional strategies could be custom strategies, which are supported, by the way, by Unleash. We have the not strategy, which means anyone that doesn't appear in a group. I don't know, a bunch of them. We can also decide to be more flexible in the way that we create groups, for example, and like not only users that are contained in the list, but also like someone who has a specific domain, or someone who has a create date, or someone in the maintainer group, or I don't know, a million
like
examples.
parameter generated groups rather than explicit list groups.
Yes, exactly. So in a recent webinar that I participated in, they had like someone who had over X projects within GitLab, okay, for example. So like an expert group. So things like that.
So the question off of that is, our current implementation of users, IDs, and eventually groups is it's all outside of GitLab. So are we saying like we're going to continue that trend, and that these user bases will probably live outside of our product, and we're just going to allow you to set up rules that you can hook into in your system? I guess that's my question, right? If it lives outside of us, the parameter-based ones might be interesting because we don't have access into these code bases. So just a thought on that one.
So at the moment, we're going to continue with Unleash as the feature flag mechanism. So definitely it would be external. Any API that a third-party application could expose a parameter could be used for those grouping answers. Maybe at some point we would think about acquiring a company that does feature flags or another open source library, depending on the amount of users they have and if it's worthwhile in terms of ROI. But at the moment, I do think that that Unleash, definitely for what we want to do right now, answers enough of it for us not to implement it internally. Andrew, who is great, actually contributed to Unleash open source in order to answer some of our needs. So I do see more of that happening and not us totally changing the method.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I guess the other, so it doesn't sound like connecting to external user management systems is probably something is going to happen on the roadmap anytime soon.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're definitely going to continue with Unleash. They're also becoming more stable and adding more functionality, so it's interesting to follow them as well. Okay, so what is not mentioned in the vision page, and maybe that's something that I need to add, is that one of the biggest disadvantages of feature flags is that it's basically tech debt. And it's really great to get an initial like feel or feedback on a feature that you're releasing, but sometimes they get lost in the code and forgotten about. So something in the vision that I think we need to go through is kind of have a dashboard for managing feature flags. And what that means is you can basically monitor your feature flags, like where they exist, in which environments, how long have they been active, what % they have been rolled out to, and basically to give the user an idea whether they need it or not. At some point, I would also like this to be automatic, but if we're talking about manually at the beginning, so I would like to have some kind of notification for stale feature flags. So for example, I hit 100% rollout. There's no need to keep the feature flag there anymore, right? So that's something I would like the user to have some kind of notification, or maybe colored in red or something to notify the user that they need to get rid of this code, this dead code. At some point, anything we could do automatic would be even better, and then have, just the pipeline remove it once it hits 100%, for example. So that would be great. But that's an easy one. But I'm also talking about something that has been in the code for like 6 months, for a year. Maybe send some kind of notification. This has been inactive. Let's delete it. Some kind of whole vision that a developer or a DevOps engineer that's working with these feature flags can know whether or not it's needed. Because sometimes even for A/B testing, let's say you decided to deliver, I don't know, 30%, 70%, whatever, and at some point you just forgot about it, left it in the code, and the majority of the people have one instance and the other have a different behavior, which is bad practice in the long run. So we really should be notifying users if something like that happens over time. Having said that, the users still need to be able to control what that period of time is, because it changes in every company. Some get quick feedback and can decide, like an experiment after a week, and some need a few months. So that's something to keep in mind. It also adds to the amount of complexity that a testing group would need to do, because there's different paths that the code goes to. So all this complexity needs to stop at a specific point in time, whether it's the maturity of the feature or once you got enough feedback. But we definitely don't want this code lying around forever.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I think we talked about this earlier. I mean, I think right now what we do is essentially list the feature flags that you have available, but what we need is a management tool of those feature flags and tools to allow you to visualize those in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, and definitely anything we can do automatically. Like if the pipeline figures out that something's not behaving right, or it's the percentage of people who are getting it is so low, just revert it, do it automatically, delete the feature flag. That would be really, really awesome if we could get that. And I think that would be a really, really big differentiator.
Yeah. And maybe just a thought on, since we're doing this in other places, just on me, maybe setting up rules at the beginning, like we did with the environments that expire. Maybe there are predefined things that if these criteria are met, then do this with the feature flag. Like you said, 100%, maybe it automatically deletes once it reaches 100%.
Yeah, exactly. So since we're part of the CI/CD vision is zero touch delivery, anything that we can automate with these predefined rules would be great. Of course, everything needs to have some kind of manual override, but anything we can do automatic, I think, is a big bonus. So again, with the dashboard, I think automatic, awesome. Notification, less awesome, but still would be like a good step in the way. Some kind of, I don't know whether it's an email or something red or some way to notify the user that some kind of action is needed. Even if they press ignore and then it's like snoozed for another month, maybe that's also something like, I would want it to be automatically deleted unless someone did something active.
Right, yeah.
What else? So a really cool feature would be to show how feature flags implement code coverage, like how much of the feature is actually reaching the end user, and whether or not some kind of experiment can be removed just because it's just not reaching the right audience. How much of the code is being duplicated because of some kind of A/B testing. Because I mean, we all want small code bases and as much of a containment as we can. So basically, when we do this, it's duplicating or the code as many times as we're adding flags. So bad practice. And retiring, we talked about. Something really interesting that I think that we could do way, way, way down the road is breadcrumbs. So kind of following the user path of how they got to whatever end scenario they got to, and what is the right path that we want them to go to. And kind of visualizing that in the dashboard would also be awesome.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one.
Another use case that we can think about for feature flags is not only like a developer develops something that's not ready yet and they want to give QA or some early adapter access to the feature, would be to actually segment groups like beta customers who have, like, let's say GitLab, we release on the 22nd of every month. If we had a group called beta users that could get this from the beginning of the month until the 22nd and get feedback from them, that would be really valuable. So actually using feature flags for segmentation for early adapters could be a really good use case. Another interesting use case could be, let's say that you're a support manager and you have a customer that's complaining about some kind of behavior specific for that customer, and you don't want to wait another month for the release. So you send them the thing behind the feature flag. That could be like targeting specific customers. So there are a lot of use cases here that we can think about that would be really beneficial for users. Questions up until now?
No. I don't know if now is a good time to bring it up, but one thing I've noticed in looking at, and this probably maybe is better once we talk through the competitors, but I feel like our current solution is very environment based, right? That's the top level thing that you do, and then your rules are kind of based off of that environment. And in looking at other competitors, a lot of them don't even address environments, or it's definitely not the top level thing. So I want to get your thoughts on if we should continue down the path of environments being at a high level, or
so in my mind, feature flags should only exist in two environments, and that's production and staging. That's it, or pre-production, or whatever you want to call it. There's no point to have feature flags in a QA environment, since they're the people testing anyway in dev. And if they don't give the okay, then you hide it behind the feature flag in the production, right? So I do think, like, in my mind, feature flags is associated to production only.
Right. I mean,
because no one else has access, no other customer has access. And I don't really see the use case of internal users getting features. It's all, in my mind, going to external customers.
I have seen it used in QA in other places where it was basically turned off for everybody except for the person QAing that particular feature, to not cause problems, right? Like, this isn't, developers are confused by this new thing, right? They say, here's this button, and it's like, wait, what is this whole thing, right? So it's just a QA thing being used just to expose it specifically for the use case of testing.
So I can see that, but I don't think it's one of the mainstream use cases. I managed QA teams for 15 years and I've never encountered it. But I don't think it's a strong enough use case for us to be dealing with that as our mainstream target audience. And when I think of how we want to dominate the marketplace, I don't think that's our target audience, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. The other reason I bring that up is I feel like we are, the way our UI currently works and the way our really code structure really works, it is, I think the sooner we break away from this environment first idea, the better off we're going to be.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I definitely think that we should be talking about production environments. There may be more than one, by the way, if we're talking about a SaaS product, there may be different instances for different customers, or even if they're using, what's it called? I don't remember what it's called for multi-customers. Anyway, I definitely see a use case for multiple production, but I don't know if we need to enable it for more than pre-production and production, because pre-production basically needs to be exactly the same as production. So I would definitely allow that environment as well. But for dev and test, I think the use case is too weak for us to create a whole dashboard around it.
Gotcha. Although, I mean, I guess my follow-up question to that was there really isn't. Production is whatever you deem it to be, right? In our system, you can name production green deployment, right?
Right.
So it almost seems like we'd have to take extra steps to limit it to only production, is what I'm trying to say. Where, you know, the way you have your environment set up, you name them what they want, you use them as you deem. It seems like we'd have to take extra steps to limit it to just production.
So I don't want to make extra work just to limit it. But when you think about it in that sense, is the question is, what's your starting point? And whether you're asking if the starting point should be environment, it probably shouldn't. It probably should be the feature flag dashboard.
Yeah. Okay.
And then once you create the feature flag, then associate the environment to it, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So let's talk a little bit about competitors. Can you see my screen right now?
Yep, I got it.
Okay, so Azure DevOps doesn't really have their own approach. They have something that's kind of an integration with LaunchDarkly, if I understood correctly. And basically, they explain in a coding language that the feature flag is, if there's a flag, then do this, and if there's no flag, do something else, right? And to add complexity, how you use it for A/B testing is basically it's the same toggle, but you tell them 67% is the first behavior and 33% is the other behavior. And if we add another case, then you can add additional percentage, right? I'm kind of looking for the way that it visually looks. Okay, found it. Okay, so this we already have supported enable disable for everyone, or enable disable for selected users. We also have this functionality. And the way that you configure it is kind of with telemetry in TFS. So you have your feature flags configuration, right? And then you have the flag, the toggle itself on or off. And then targeted individual users, you see it's very similar to ours. And then you have rule-based, which we don't have at the moment, but we do have some issues in the roadmap regarding rule-based, which is kind of what we talked about. Anyone who has a domain, or anyone who follows more than X projects in GitLab, or someone who is under 30 days use. So that's rules. The default is configurable. I think that we decided that the feature flag would be by default off, but I may be mistaken. So here it's configurable. And you see that you have here if launch darkly, blah, 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 configuration. And what this means is, so basically the feature flag is decided if it's on or off on the client side, okay? It's not on the server side. So basically if I can configure a flag in GitLab, there's some kind of configuration file that goes down to the client and tells them the feature flag is on or off. And this is pulled every X amount of time. But if GitLab server is unavailable at some point in time, it doesn't mean that nothing works. It means that the last configuration that the client had, that's what's used. Okay, that's the optimal behavior. Here that you can decide to have a different kind of configuration. But I don't think we're going to go down this route. I think we want to use the last known configuration. And worst case is, if in the last, I don't know, 20 minutes you turn the flag on and the server fell, the user will still have the previous behavior. Okay?
Yep, makes sense.
So this is all the telemetry. It's a little bit complex in my opinion. Also having all in one, but that's a different story. I'll send you the link to this so you can, read about it and play around with it if you want. Let me find the chat. And also, basically, if they don't have launch darkly, I'm not sure that this works.
Gotcha.
So that's basically feature flags here. Another thing that we didn't mention, but I think is really important to mention, is that everything needs to be in a log. It actually needs to be one of the first features after we complete the dog fooding, because we're working towards evidence collection, which is not related to feature flags, but in evidence collection, any action that you do throughout the pipeline or the development needs to be logged, and therefore also toggling a feature flag on or off needs to be logged, when it was done, by whom, and in which environment. I'm not sure I created an issue for that, but I definitely need to. And something else that I think would be beneficial, and I'm not sure exactly how to describe this in an issue, is imagine that you're a support manager and you get a call from a user and he says, oh my God, where did my settings go? And it turns out someone turned on a feature flag for them and the settings is just in a different location. So we need some kind of configuration to enable customer support or support engineers to know instinctively like what kind of configuration a user has in order to help them out with their problem. So I'm not sure how to define that exactly, but that's something that we would probably need to address going forward.
Right. Yeah, no, it is an important one. Basically, to be able to know what configuration they have and then maybe potentially mirror that for yourself as a support person so you can.
Yeah, which means you would probably need to know like what group they're in. If we had the breadcrumbs functionality that I mentioned before, that would be definitely cover the scenario where you would just see the user flow, right? So you'd know exactly what they got. But I think this is a little bit complex and probably further down the road in terms of the roadmap, but also could be a really, really good differentiator for GitLab.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Azure DevOps, which is our main competitor because they're a single tool for the DevOps pipeline. Optimizely is a small one, but they do something really, really neat. I'll let you play with this demo later. I'll send you this one as well.
Yeah, this is the super clean one, right? That does just the step.
I'm trying to get marketing to do it. Let's see if we can see how they configure it here. So let's say I give a name and you can decide like the % rollout. Forget the fact that this is pretty. We already have this supported in our feature flag implementation, but you can see exactly what happens in the code. And I think in our case, it's reverse. Like first you need to create the code and then you can enable the %. And this is kind of for more beginner users, if you get my drift. And then basically you can see everything that was created in the code. And what's interesting here in the demo is that you can see the stickiness. So you can see that Ian, George, and Hillary didn't get it. And if I run it again, it's the same Ian, George, and Hillary, which is exactly the behavior that we have to have mimicked that every user gets the same experience every time. I don't know if we can see how they configure it on their end. I don't want the demo. Okay, so let's try to figure this out. Okay, so you have the feature flag name, you have the environments and the percent rollout, and I think this is very similar to our current dashboard. Then you have audiences. I don't know if we'll get a sneak peek at that. Okay, I don't know if they support like rule-based, but that's something that I can definitely look into.
And yeah, I've looked at this one before, and I do love that, like, it does spit out, you know, like it's explicit about who's going to get it at the end of the day, right? Which is a very nice feedback loop. Unfortunately, it's kind of why I was asking earlier about, you know, if we don't build in a system that connects to a user management system, right, we're never going to be able to really expose that kind of information, because that's kind of the black box that we're not connecting to. So it's
So actually, I think that if we do do some kind of LDAP integration, we could probably overcome that, because most of the user management systems do connect to LDAP at some kind of LDAP or system, and they don't make up their own. So if we do that, we could definitely overcome it. Also, I have been part of different configuration management systems that exposed via API or some kind of CSV file just the usernames from one system to another in order to enable this integration. So yes, going forward along the line, it'll be really super important to do it. But as a first phase, I don't think that it's a must-have. It's definitely important, but I don't think it's on the top priority list.
Yeah, it's not like a core feature. It really gets to be a nice to have, and it'd be fantastic if you had all that. But it's a lot of upfront dev, I would imagine, and probably a lot of then support of maintaining those connections to whatever user systems we connect to. But
yeah. I'm now looking at CloudBees, which is another competitor. And I actually created a summary on this one. I'm looking for it. 1 minute. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing and share a different page. Okay, so I attended a CloudBee webinar, and it's just that the images that I took there were just clearer than the website. Let's zoom in. Okay, so basically what they had here was audience, and this is what we were discussing about the rule-based, which means that all versions, all users, you could play around a bunch of things here, and also do complex feature flags, like if, and then add another logic. So you can have multiple rules for one feature flag. Okay, so it could be all the users from a GitLab domain that have been using the product for under a month, right? So it's combined rules. which I really liked. And you can also, like, inside the same view, set like not only on or off, but true or false per percentage. So it's like very complex all in one. I'm not sure. I think simple may be the best solution and not having everything in one page. Just like we discussed earlier on environments, that maybe each thing should be its own process just to have easier maintainability. Let's see.
Yeah, so like I think rules for defining user groups makes a lot of sense, and then maybe just applying those rules to a feature flag.
Yeah, I like the rule-based, and also anything rule-based can be automatically turned off later.
Yeah.
So what was this one? This was a dashboard of like the flag. So this is the flag, what the status, whether it's active or non-active. There's also kind of some kind of label. I don't know at the moment like what it's used for, but maybe useful later on in the day. When it was created, when it was last used, how many users are actually visible to this feature flag, which is a really, really good one that we don't currently have planned. And I think this one's good, and the deployment, like the percentage of deployment, right?
Yeah. But I think that total users one, like that's going to require a connection to an LDAP or something like that.
Yeah.
I would think. I think that comes up a lot, right? It's like, ooh, that's nice, but ooh, it's you got to go down a whole path to get that one number.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a nice to have. I don't think it's something that we have to have in terms of feature flags. And I don't think this is a make or break feature that if I don't know the number of users that I won't buy GitLab, right? It's not a differentiator.
Yeah.
It's nice. Okay, so I don't remember what this one was. Production experiments. I don't remember what this one was doing. Well, this is also neat. Okay, so this is blue, green, and red. So this is mainly focused for A/B testing. It's not our core feature flag functionality, but definitely one that's very interesting and maybe something interesting to look at for the roadmap. Once we hit A/B testing, which is, allows more than binary on or off, but actually more use cases, then seeing how many, even percent-wise, not actual users, have all the different kinds of options, and this is dispersed on different environments, I think that's really interesting. This is the rule-based, but they do it on a code-based environment. So you have rules for email, so a domain like at gitlab.com, or this was playlist count, which could be our parallel of amount of projects or code-based. And then the plan, so plan could be tier, it was premium or gold subscription or something like that. That's like our parallel. But they do it in terms of the code and not like through the UI. So this was their groups, how you manage groups. So the rule was someone would be named a DJ if they had a playlist that had over 101 songs. So our parallel would be more than 10 projects, more than 10 active projects. I'm just throwing things out there. I may be saying things that don't make any sense, but you understand the gist of the idea, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So here you have like paying user, so it could be free versus any tier, and so on and so forth. And this was something that I really liked, and that's managing feature flag dependencies. In theory, you can create a feature flag that is connected to code that already has a feature flag connected to it. And then you don't want to get to a situation where one is turned on and one is turned off, and then some weird behavior happens. So this allows you to manage, like, if, like, creating a regular feature flag, and then also if this feature flag is turned off, then also turn this one off.
Gotcha.
So this one is really neat. I think I already created an issue for that one, but to be realistic, I think this is way, way down the line. Okay, so this is more about the groups and how it supports regular expression, which is really cool. I haven't even created an issue for this because we don't support regex for anything yet, like when filtering. So I think this is really, really even further down the line in terms of what we want to create. And audit logs we already mentioned, which is really important. So you can see, the name of the feature flag, when the timestamp, the user that created it, and what the rule that they created was. So definitely one of the most important features, and one that we need to create when we go to mass production. And then we have permissions, also a nice subject. So you can see here you have the permissions is based on the username. Email, I guess, is just something that we can read from the username. It's not that important. And for every environment, what kind of access they have and what role they have, right? And that actually gives you the permission for the feature flag. So it's the same permission that they have for the environment, which is something that we discussed once in a very, very old correspondence that we had regarding permissions that we at the moment didn't touch because of the pushback that we got internally, because developers needed access also for production. So this is still an open-end question of how we want to implement it in GitLab. I think that this is the right implementation, which is if you have access to an environment, then you have access to turn on the flag. But I guess we need to understand the internal use case first before turning off this capability for our own developers.
Okay, yep, makes sense. I remember that discussion.
So this is a dashboard that they had, which was really cute, regarding like watching all the feature flags in one place and whether or not they're active. So green means active, and it states also per environment the percent rollout. We have something similar, but not as slick. And what I really liked was that once it hit 100%, it became gray, and it auto archived the feature flag. So it didn't like delete it, it archived it, and then if someone would one day want to go back to it, they could potentially. So this is something neat. It gives you a lot of information in one view. And this is how they had the archive. You can select to archive something, you get some kind of notification. And then you can also bring it back to life. It's somewhere here. Today we do it from the YAML, so that's kind of similar. This is kind of describes what we said about the behavior using the last known configuration, even if the server is down. And I guess that's about it regarding CloudBees, which is formerly known as rollout. So we have 5 minutes left. Anything else that you want to discuss?
Is that the list, the entire list of competitors? I see also on the vision page you had one for the same one that Azure is using.
Launch darkly.
Launch darkly.
Yeah.
So I'll look at that.
Launch darkly, I think, is the biggest one. They have a very, very comprehensive solution. I don't think we're going to be matching them feature by feature. We're also pretty late in the game, and basically, I'm not sure that every use case that they support, we want to support at the end of the day. I do want to be able to be proud to say that we have a feature flag solution that ties together nicely with our CD solution. But I'm not sure that everything that they do for legacy is something that we would want to address.
Gotcha. Okay, so any other competitors I should be aware of?
I'm kind of looking at what feature flags are used with Atlassian products. I did this before, but I don't remember off the top of my head. So let's see. They are using, oh, this is actually really interesting. Let me stop sharing this page and share the other one. Just 1 minute. So this is feature flagging with Atlassian, right? And feature flagging in Jira. And this one actually had the item that we are working on 12.4, which is associating the feature flag to the issue. And the way it shows you the flag, whether it's on or off, and the percent rollout, which I like.
Yep.
But this, I'm not sure they have an in-house solution. It looks like they're integrating with others. Let's see, who are they using? So they also support Launch Darkly and Rollout, which is Cloudbees, which we talked about, and Optimizely, which we talked about. So we talked about these three. So we talked about all the ones that integrate with Jira.
Okay. Yeah, I've Googled a few times. There's a few other small ones out there. Okay. I think that basically covers it. This was super helpful. I appreciate you walking me through this.
Yeah, happy to. And we could do a follow-up session with reviewing your UI if you'd like that.
Yeah, I think hearing this, I think a lot of these have been addressed in what I've put together so far. So that exercise might actually be worthwhile because I do feel like what I put together has hit a lot of these points. So we'll do that and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. So I'd appreciate it if you post this somewhere for the team to see, because I think there's benefits from it as well.
Yep, absolutely. I'll let it process and then I'll get it posted.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
rest of your day and happy birthday.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.